Here we go. It's always, those are always some of our busiest days. Again, another one of our busiest days will be when the weather first breaks here in Chicago, because we have a winter, right? When that warm weather, this day here, especially because it's the last day of public school, today is going to be pretty much a beast. So when those calls for service are coming in, our call takers have to ask questions to try to ascertain that information. And I like to refer to those questions as the 5 W's. I find that the easiest way to let people know what the questions are going to be and why we're asking those questions. So the first W for us is going to be where. Here in Chicago, where is the most important? Our technology is upgrading. It is getting it's really nice in comparison to what it was when I first started. But, right, there's still some advances that could be made. So people say, well, when I call on my cell phone, how come you just don't know where I am? And our technology here, we utilize a cell phone tower. So the tower pings off of your cell phone, and that's how we ascertain your location. It's not an exact location. We can get close to your location, but it may not be an exact address. So I like to tell people to make sure that they're giving us either an exact location or 2 cross streets. And here in Chicago, we have a district and a beat system. And so that boundary of the beat or the district can be in that intersection. So sometimes I like to make sure that people understand why we're asking what side of the intersection are you on, because it can mean the difference between the beat or the district or Chicago and a suburban agency or Chicago and Indiana, depending on where you are in the city, because we border Indiana. So I like to make sure people understand that I really need your location. I need to know if it's happening inside or outside, if there's an apartment number, if there's a bell code, if there's a gate access, if we have to call you when we get on scene. We need all of that for location information. Again, more information that you're giving us up front makes it kind of easier for the officers that are responding. We also need to know what happened. So what prompted you to call 911? What's going on? What do you see happening at that moment? Do you see someone fighting outside? Do you see somebody parked in a permanent parking space? Like, what prompted you to call 911? I need to know, when did it happen? Is this something that's happening right now? Did it happen 10 minutes ago? Is this something that you just woke up and discovered that your car was broken into? If that is the case, then this may be something where it's just a police report that's required. Here in Chicago, we have an alternate response section, and that section can generate a police report for a crime where there's no offender on scene, none expected to return, there are no injuries, it doesn't involve a weapon, it's not domestic in nature. If they just need a police report, we have a section in which they can get that police report over the phone, and we can transfer them to that person to make that police report. Now, we need to know who is involved, because we want to know, are you calling because you're the victim? Are you calling on behalf of somebody else, or are you just reporting what you see? And here in Chicago, we need to make sure that people understand that if you're not the victim, you can be anonymous, right? So as long as you're not the person that it happened to, then you don't have to leave your name and number. However, we will still ask for your name or number, because sometimes there are follow-up questions that the officers might have, and we want to be able to contact the person who called in that call for service. So we'll ask for your name and number, but once you've been made anonymous, when it gets to the dispatcher doesn't see it. When it gets to the officer, they don't see it on their computer. The only person who can get that information is a sergeant or higher, and they will only get that information over the telephone or in a message. So the last W is going to be weapons. And the reason why I bring up weapons is because oftentimes people only think of guns and knives as a weapon. But the thing is anything that can be used to cause physical damage or bodily harm is a weapon. So this right here, this is a weapon, right? The computer that we're on can become a weapon. The chair that you're sitting in can become a weapon. Anything that's being used to cause physical damage and bodily harm is a weapon, and we want that information. The next thing that we like to go over with people is to make sure that they're understanding that there's going to be some additional questions that we're asking, and that would be descriptions. So it could be if the person was the offender male or female, did they have long hair or short hair? We like to ask about their clothing information. And I like to make sure I tell people that with clothing, right, I can have on this black jacket and some black pants, but underneath it might be a white t-shirt and gray shorts. And I know I've heard it over the radio where they said, squad, I got a black jacket here in the gangway. Do they have a color of the shirt? The one thing that's probably not going to change is shoes. And you see how bright my nails are? That's what shoes look like now, right? They look super bright from a distance. So if people can see the shoes from a distance, let us know what those shoes are. We want to know, were they on foot or were they in a vehicle? And even if they were on foot or in a vehicle, we're going to ask you for that direction of flight. If you can let us know. And for us here in Chicago, that means northbound, southbound, eastbound, or westbound, or towards the street that they were headed, because that way we know what direction, because when people say they went down the street, that really doesn't mean much to me. I don't know what direction down the street is. So, but with vehicles, and this is the thing, I get it. I tell people, because I have a 4 and an 8-year-old that really like cars. I also really like cars. So I know makes and models of all sorts of vehicles and engine types, but you may not know that. So if you could tell me it was a black car or a red car, it was a pickup truck or SUV, it had 4 doors or 2 doors with front end damage or rear end damage, it had tinted windows, whatever you see, or the plate information, it wasn't an Illinois plate. Again, that's really good information for us. So when we get all this information here in Chicago, we have event types that have already been created by the police department. And all of those event types have a priority assigned to them, because we utilize a priority system in order to decide to determine which events go out first. So the highest, oldest priority job will always be dispatched out first. And the way that we determine the priority is by those questions that we're asking. So we have priority ones. Priority 1 would indicate imminent threat to life. That could be a battery in progress. It could be a person shot or shots fired. Priority 2 would indicate that the immediate threat has dissipated, but the offender is still nearby or on the scene. And that could be the battery that just occurred. It could be a suspicious auto with occupants. That's a priority 2. So the immediate threat is dissipated, but the need for the police to respond fairly quickly is pretty much still needed because the offender is still, again, nearby or on the scene. Priority 3 would indicate that this might be a report of some sort or a nuisance complaint. So that could be the permit parking violations. It could be a battery report. It could be a loud music disturbance. So something along those lines would indicate a priority 3. And what's going to happen is that one of the biggest complaints that we get would be, well, if you're asking me all these questions, how are you sending the police? And this is the thing, here in Chicago, we have what we call details to follow. So, and again, I'm going to explain. Here in Chicago, we have police call takers and police dispatchers, fire call takers and fire dispatchers. So in our section, it's all separated, right? Whenever you call 911, you're always going to get a police call taker. And that police call taker will determine the need of your call, be it for police services or EMS or fire. If you need EMS or fire, we have to transfer you to a fire call taker. And that fire call taker will have questions to ask. I do have to let people know that, because sometimes when people call in and you transfer, they say, well, you just asked me that question. But actually we didn't. Our voices just sounded like it's actually the fire call taker that asked you that question, because they have their list of questions and they're EMT certified. So in the event that they have to start giving medical instructions, they can. And but what's happening is once we get the basic information, our police call taker can send that call for service over to what we call the zone or the dispatcher to begin dispatching it out to the police. They can continue to update that event in real time. And then the dispatcher can give that information out to the officers in real time as the call taker gets the information from the caller. And again, we refer to that as details to follow. So when we're getting calls for service, and I know that this particular call, one of the calls that we wanted to kind of discuss or talk about are calls that might have a mental health component. And for those calls, we refer to them as our CIT or call with a CIT component, right? And that's our crisis intervention team. For officers, there are officers within CPD who have been trained in this, and they've taken a 40-hour course to get the training. We do have the call takers and dispatchers here. We go through an 8-hour course before we are on the floor. All of the PCOs have gone through it. This program was initiated in 2016. And all of our PCOs went through it on the floor. Whenever we get a new class, the new class is put through this training. And again, for the PCOs here, it's an 8-hour course. If you want to be CIT certified for the officers, they have to go through the 40-hour course. And when the calls for service come over, when we're getting that information, someone might call in and say, well, my daughter hasn't taken her medication. And that might prompt our call taker to then ask questions related to CIT. So some of the questions that our call takers have to ask, because there's a triage that we have to fill out for a mental health related call, could be if there are any weapons present. Again, we want to know whatever it is, anything used that can cause physical damage or bodily harm. We want to know if there's a mental illness that exists. And we do have a list that our call takers can use. If someone says, well, maybe they just suffer from severe depression, or they're bipolar, or possibly they have PTSD. So we do have a list there that has some of the mental health issues that are common. And if they say that, then we will check that off. We want to know if they're under doctor's care, if they're taking any medication. Do they have any violent tendencies, or are they being violent right now? We kind of narrowed it. They also expanded it just to have another field to state specifically what the violent tendency might be. So if it's kicking or screaming or yelling or cursing or pacing, whatever the violent tendency is. And again, if you're answering yes to any of these questions, this is a CIT related event. You can have, and we like to make sure our call takers understand that they can have a CIT component with any call for service, right? It could be a battery in progress with the CIT component. But we do have 4 event types currently right now that have an automatic CIT component. That would be a mental health disturbance, attempt suicide, threatening suicide, or a mental unauthorized absence. That's from the hospital. Those ones automatically have a CIT component, so the triage is automatically there. But the way our form is set up here, our call taker can initiate a CIT component when the call is created. And once that call is created for anything CIT related, our dispatchers will know that there's a CIT component because it displays differently on their board. So that way our dispatchers can kind of understand how the resources that they're allocating for that. We have officers that are specifically trained for CIT calls, and we will always attempt to give the job to the CIT officer first. We don't want to compromise time. So if there's another officer closer, we still will send the other officer and just make sure the officer that has a CIT, that is CIT trained, make sure that they're aware of it so they can come assist to be available for that call for service. So I also like to make sure that people understand when you're calling 911, we do have to gather as much information as possible, but we do have something that we utilize here in Chicago, or I've seen people use it, which is Smart 911. Have you all here? I know if you're inside of Illinois, you've probably heard of Smart 911 because it is throughout Illinois, but have other people heard of Smart 911? No? Okay, and wait, that's Iowa City. I'm a Hawkeye. Okay, I'm back. Professional. We'll talk about it later. Okay, thanks. Okay, right. So Smart 911 is a program that the city has. And in this program, you can create a profile. On that profile, you can upload all sorts of information like emergency contact information. You can upload vehicle information. If anyone has any pets, you can upload medical information. If anyone has any illnesses, you can connect other households to your profile. So if you visit a relative on a regular basis and they have medical issues, you can upload that information into your profile. You can connect other phone numbers to your profile. So as long as the number has been verified through Smart 911, the information that you're uploading, we will be able to see that information when you call into 911. You can upload pictures of the residents within your location. Maybe somebody has, in the later stages of dementia. I had a neighbor who actually had dementia, and I knew her because she was my neighbor. So I knew when she was out of the house, like, hey, Mrs. Smith, are you going back home right now? And I can walk her back home. But if somebody who didn't know her, because she was an elderly, and they saw her, or if somebody called because she's missing, we would see the picture of that person, of the resident within the household for Smart 911. So, and this is what our call taker can see. What happens is when the call for service comes over, if a phone number has been verified through Smart 911, any of the numbers connected to that profile have been verified, we will see the information when you call 911. The only person that can see that information is the call taker during the course of the call. The information is only available for up to 30 minutes after the call has been made, in the event that there are other questions that someone might have regarding that profile. The call taker can then copy and paste the information from the profile into the call for service. So the dispatcher and the officers can also see that information. For emergency contact information, we would know who to contact if you were in some sort of accident or something happened. Or vehicle information. Again, if someone whose number is connected, or maybe they didn't take your phone when it was hijacked, we would have your vehicle information. I know plate numbers, I know my plate number, but when things happen, sometimes you forget that information. That's pretty vital. And for our call taker, if you're giving our call taker your plate information, that means I'm running the plate before I even get it out to the officers. So again, we're not waiting for the officers to get on scene with you to try and ascertain what your plate number is. We already have the information and we're giving that information out over the air. Kind of, it's more time efficient. So we want to, and again, this is just something that kind of helps us help you. Smart 911 also allows us to be able to text call for services back, cell phone numbers back, working cell phone numbers. We can text those numbers back if they call into 911. Say they may have a nonverbal person who's still very functioning and they need to call 911 because maybe something happened to mom. Well, we'll know because on their profile it says preferred method of communication is texting. So we can immediately begin texting back and forth to the person to ascertain what's going on. I've seen people use this in a domestic situation where she called in, she couldn't talk, but he fell asleep, but he was sleeping right there and she couldn't move, but she could text us. So we were able to get her information, verify her information, and let her know that the police were outside when they pulled up, and they were able to get her. So I kind of like what this kind of allows us to do through Smart 911. I know the city in Chicago, for those who are here, if you have a private camera system, they are, you can state on the system that you do have a private camera system, and the CPD is compiling that information because how many things have been, caught with cameras now. So again, this is another kind of data field that we're entering into with Smart 911 and some of the other programs that we have. But I think it's a pretty decent program. I kind of like it. And again, only our call takers can see it. You do have to go on your profile every 6 months. There haven't been any security breaches to the program. They're not asking you for credit card information or anything like that. And the information is information that you wish to upload. So it's not anything other than what you already kind of wish to upload. And our call takers are not going to utilize the information. If you're calling about a loud music disturbance, but you do have medical information there, we're not using that information based on that call for service. So we're only using that information if it relates to your call for service. So I think that kind of covers basically everything that we have related to our 911 operations here in Chicago. Do you all have any questions for me?
Questions for Bev. Bev, I'll start with one. When you get a call from an area code, from a cell phone, do you know by its, do you judge by its area code where it's from, or you described a proximity device?
So it is only by the cell phone tower that it pings off of. So the cell phone will ping off of a tower within its vicinity. And our technology here allows us to get somewhere within 100 feet of the cell phone's location, not based on the area code. Wow.
The next question, do you have particular script that you have for your dispatchers when there's a one of these 4 CIT event types? Do you have a particular script that you go through asking particular questions?
So they do have the triage questions. The triage questions that they ask. So there's 7 triage questions that they have to ask. But the other questions that they're asking are just the regular questions that we ask during the call for service based on what it is they're calling about.
Would you be able to share those 7 questions with us? Not today, but something I can pass on.
Okay, yeah, the ones that I mentioned, if there are any weapons, does a mental illness exist? They're under doctor's care, medication, violent tendencies, and then the description of the violent tendencies. Those were
thank you. Thank you so much. Elizabeth, have you got a question?
I do, and hello, thank you, and cool to see a Hawkeye in this.
A Hawkeye, okay.
So my question is about kind of if you have estimates about how many of your dispatches like end up being coded as having a CIT component. That's part 1. And then part 2 is sort of like whether you think all of the calls that could be coded as CIT or having a mental health component are being identified that way. And the reason I ask is because that's a big issue here when kind of deciding who will serve, is that we may contextualize something as having a mental health component, but law enforcement won't, or is like still developing and identifying that piece. So that's sort of where I'm coming from with the question.
Okay, so the actual numbers, our department doesn't tally the numbers, so I wouldn't have those numbers right there. But what has kind of evolved over the years is it is not up for us as a dispatcher to decide whether that was a CIT related call, because sometimes what people say on the phone is not what happens when the officers get on scene. So it is up to the officer to code it out. If there is a CIT component, they will utilize a code that has what we call a Z component. And that will indicate to us if there was in fact a CIT component. The call could have come over as a loud music disturbance, but the officer still codes it out with the Z component to let us know that it actually did have a CIT component within it. So we don't make the decision on our side of operations here. It is only on CPD side whether there was a CIT component.
Oh, okay. So I think I'm confused. So then but there's some, for certain things you are, because then you're dispatching those identified officers, but then there may be others that aren't identified by dispatch, but then later turn out to be. Is that?
Yeah, so I'm sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, that's all.
Okay, yeah, so both of that, right? So again, when the call comes in, based on what the caller is saying, the call taker will classify it what they believe it to be. So if they believe it to be a mental health disturbance, they will classify it that way. Once the officer gets on scene, the officer will then handle the call as they feel appropriate. But if they determine that there was not, in fact, the CIT component within this call, then the code that they use to close out the event will not have the Z code to indicate that there was, in fact, the CIT component.
Thanks. Lieutenant King.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks, Beverly, for being here. I have a question, and depending upon the answer, I guess we'll determine if I have another question. Do you guys, besides your CIT officers, do you have any alternative responders in Chicago? Is there anybody besides the police that have the option or have the ability to respond to a call?
We actually do, but this is a very new program, so this isn't one that I'm kind of talking about right now. Tiffany, am I deferring to you for this right here? So
I can take it.
Great.
Okay, yes.
I can take it. So we, in the city of Chicago, for the first time in our history, we have a multidisciplinary response team, which is inclusive of a community paramedic, a CIT officer, and a licensed clinician. And then we've recently just rolled out our alternate response team, which consists of a community paramedic and a licensed clinician. And then probably early fall, we'll have an opioid response team that's going to roll out as well. And that'll be a paramedic and a peer. So we have a couple of different crisis response teams that are piloting in the city.
Okay, thank you. And so with that in mind, I would be curious about any information related to dispatch and how that triaging is happening when someone calls in, and how is the decision getting made as to it's going to be one of these newer programs that Tiffany's referring to versus CIT, and is that call coming through the same dispatch system that Beverly has been talking about?
So yes, the call is coming through the same system, and Beverly mentioned the questions that are asked as the calls are being triaged. Those questions are the very same questions that we use to discern CARE, which is the name of our program, the crisis response program, versus CIT. Some of it has to do with, because we're piloting, it's geocoded, so we know if it's in our catchment area for CARE program. If it's not, then it automatically defaults to CIT. If it happens during our business, our operating hours, then it's ours if it meets criteria. If it's not, it automatically defaults to the next, to the other programs that are being operated. So it's kind of an if-then kind of scenario in that regard.
Would you be willing at some point in the future to share some of the particulars of that information? What I'm mostly curious in is when, for the program that is I think you said paramedic and the peer, what is it that gets answered in those questions that says this is the right people, or we believe this is the right group to respond.
Yeah, and I
I'd be
think
curious.
that particular model is an opioid response specific model. And so it will be based off of, to my understanding, a response to opioid overdose. But I don't have any more information in the way of that, as we haven't even, we're still trying to collect how we're going to stand that model up. So it's, like I said, it's coming fall, sometime in the fall, early fall. Predictions are late summer, but I've been doing this work long enough to know to add at least a month or so to the estimated predictions.
And we'll have a city report from Chicago and Tiffany at our conference in the spring.
Mhm.
So we'll have a full half hour of all the different parts and pieces of what Chicago's doing. Amy, did that get your answers? Did you get your answers?
I think so. I probably still have more questions, but I want to give the opportunity for others. And I do see a question in the chat that I would have too, is how is your recruiting going for peers?
Yeah,
Very curious about that.
that's a question for Tiffany.
So as far as the peer recruitment goes, I know what we're thinking of doing is releasing an RFP to some of our community agencies who already have peer staff working for them. Under the 988 and CESA initiatives, we have a 590 program that's happening, operated by the state of Illinois. And that is a mobile crisis program that includes peers. And I know with that particular work, they were looking for peers that will become CRSSs, or certified recovery support specialists. And so within that model, I think that's where the peer support is going to come from. We will probably work with an agency that already has that infrastructure set up.
Thanks, Tiffany. Dan?
Thanks, Jason. And thank you, Beverly, for all that information, and Tiffany too. My questions, I have a lot of questions, but it sounds pretty clear to me that whenever there are 911 alternative responses, it seems important to have paramedics involved, probably because you want to be sure people are medically stable when you're there on site. And with 988 here in Illinois, alternatives for 988, they are comprising those mobile crisis response units or teams out of clinicians and peers. So they won't have paramedics. And so I think, but I think my big question is, when you get a call and somebody's in crisis, it must be very difficult to get all the information you need and get the exact best match for the dispatch on people. How long does that process usually take?
So it can vary, right? We do make sure that our call takers understand that calls for service that might have a mental health component may take longer. You may be on the phone with them longer. We have instances where she was on the phone with the person who was threatening to jump into the river until the paramedics got on scene, right? And they just had a regular conversation, and you might have to be more creative in those calls for service. So I won't say that there's a time frame as to how long it takes. I will say that more often than not, people actually will give you the information if you ask the question, right? And for us, we're just getting very basic information based on the questions that we're asking you. We may have to go further into detail to get more descriptions of maybe what the person is wearing, but a lot of the times you kind of get it down to the science of how you're asking the questions when someone's calling in. So, but yeah, it's a possibility. It may take a little bit longer for you to be on the phone with that person, but that doesn't happen all the time, but it is. But I don't have a time gauge normally.
Well, it was very interesting to hear about the Smart 911. I did not know about that. And I don't know if you're in contact with the people who are developing the 988 in Illinois, but it'd be wonderful if 988 had a Smart 988, if the same technology could be used. Because one thing I've learned talking to crisis programs that are presently taking mental health calls is that they have a lot of repeat users, people that call over and over again. So being able to see information on them so that different call takers can have, prepackaged information on people would be wonderful. A big leg up, I think, on being able to decide how to dispatch.
But one of the things we do here, and I'm part of that community engagement, where we're actually going out into the community to help people, to sign people up, right? To create the profile form so that we have that information. I believe that there are currently 22 states that utilize Smart 911. Illinois, I know, is one of the full, so like Florida is a full state, I believe Michigan, maybe Wisconsin. These are where the full state uses Smart 911. Some other states, only certain like areas within that state or certain cities use Smart 911. You can put your zip code in to see if your municipality has it, but it is something that is expanded throughout the US now.
And do you do that online? Is there a site online you go to sign up for?
Yes, you can either do the app or you can do www.smart911.com. And this is the other thing. Oh my goodness, I didn't tell you. So it travels with you. So if you do create your profile, right, and you go somewhere and they have Smart 911, they will see the same information that you put on your profile. So say if I go to Florida on vacation and somebody has a medical emergency, the Florida call taker can see my medical information based on that call for service. So we can see it. It travels with you wherever you go.
That's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. You probably have more questions. We'll come back around. John Buckner, do you want to ask your question that's in the chat?
Yeah, sorry. I was trying to get back to my screen. I was reading the chat. I had a quick question. So we did a demo with Smart 911, and we did others, Everbridge and a couple others. And the concern our director had, she was a big advocate of Smart 911. But when we started pulling back the layers of the onion, we found out they could not look people up using their name versus a phone number. Mm-hmm. And the concern with that was a lot of our populace change phones a lot. They're using the phone maybe at the you're from the 7-Eleven or whatever else for a short period, or they lose their phone, or you come across someone in crisis and it's easy maybe to access somebody using an ID or just a name versus looking them up over a phone number. So that was a concern we had, and I didn't know if anyone else is aware of a system that could look people up by phone and name.
Anyone know of something like that?
People know to make sure that if you have other relatives, to have their number verified through the profile. That way, if somebody else has to call for you, we'll still see it. One other thing that I tell people to do on their phone is put their emergency information in their phone, so that if they do, somebody does, because it happened here where the guy had a seizure in front of our job, but he had his cell phone, and I went to his emergency part and it had his seizure information, his medicine information, for people to put that in their phone if they don't have Smart 911. So when people get on scene, they can still get the information that they need from you.
Thank you.
Great. Ann in Oakland.
Good morning. Thank you so much for this presentation. I was curious, well, first of all, in terms of the Smart 911, it has to be renewed every 6 months?
It just has to be verified every 6 months. So you just have to literally go into the app or go online, say, hey, this is all correct, and then you can exit out. They just want to make sure that things haven't changed. So if you don't go on it every 6 months, it becomes inactive. We won't see it until you verify that the information is still correct.
Okay, so I'm assuming that you lose a good number of people with that 6 months.
No, you'd be surprised how quickly people do still go on. The number doesn't fluctuate very much. Because again, if I'm signing you up, I'm gonna make sure I tell you, go on there every 6 months and verify your information. You see how I said it?
Yeah. So here's your question. You were mentioning earlier about weapons. We've been having a lot of conversations with the police about in our city about how they view weapons, and that actually part of the problem is that they're trained as all weapons are the same. And obviously a tree branch is much less threatening than a gun. which has a much longer range of potential threat. And I'm just curious, the other thing is that I think it was Albuquerque that said recently that they're finding that the vast majority of the calls that they go on as a non-response, as a non-co-response model, there's a weapon present because they're unhoused people. And they typically have some kind of a weapon. That's not to say that they're utilizing the weapon or threatening people with the weapon at that moment, but there is in fact a weapon present. And I'm just curious if you all are, how you all are handling weapons. Is it a binary, if there's a weapon, whether it's in the person's hands, whether there's any indication that the person is indicating that they might use the weapon? Is it just weapon, yes or no? Or are you beginning to kind of tease out what's going on with the weapon in terms of who can respond?
Well, I've always, if somebody has, well, sometimes people will say, well, there are knives in the house. And I like for clarification, does a person have the knife in their hand now? Are they threatening somebody else with the knife? Right? So we do want all sorts of clarification as far as if there's a weapon involved. I just want to make sure that people understand that anything can be used as a weapon. And we've had instances where somebody used, and it was a tree branch. We don't know how big the tree branch is. Like I'm not there, I can't make any assumptions. So if somebody says he has a tree branch and he's holding it and he's threatening somebody else with the tree branch, I'm going to notate that inside of the event and let the officers know who are responding. I can only speak again from the taking of the call and the disseminating of the information to the officers. As to how they're going to handle that situation, I can't speak for the way that they're going to take the encounter, but I do know that they want as much information as possible when I'm sending them to the call for service.
And Ann, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Thanks, Ann. Coming back around, do other people have questions? Lieutenant King, Dan, others?
I have one more question.
Elizabeth.
Okay, I was curious. So when you were speaking about like your folks spending perhaps a longer conversation on the phone with someone who is that's the dispatcher. So
Well,
Okay.
that's the work.
Yeah, I know.
We've all heard that tune before.
Any questions? Any other questions while we wait for Elizabeth to return? So maybe it would be good now to have sort of a more open discussion about dispatch and thinking about different models of dispatch. And if people could sort of describe briefly the dispatch, how their teams are receiving calls at this time. So if you're in Flagstaff or in Albuquerque or in Iowa City or in Oakland, how do you get a call? And how is that working for you as far as, a relationship with that other entity?
Well, I'll take the first stab. Hi, everybody. This is Elliot. I'm with the macro program out of Oakland, California, within the fire department. Ms. Carrington, thank you for that explanation about how the 911 system goes. And it comes into out here, it's highway patrol, then PD, and then it's funneled to fire. What we have found with our fire department dispatch is that they just are not trained to do the triage and the questions. They require a script. That's just guardrails. In absence of that, we found that the most effective way for them to reach us is actually interdepartmental dispatches from other fire engines and companies. They're on scene, they can radio back in, and then the dispatcher will make the call to our macro crews that are in the streets. This happened after our first couple of weeks, just as a chance, try it out. And now we have found that about once a day, we get an internal dispatch from a fire department unit. They're becoming more comfortable with us, but again, without the guardrails of a script for them, they're hesitant to turn on the system and to launch the phone number. We have it, it's all in place, it's all ready to go, but we must be aware of their training, and that's the one thing that they require. So anything that you have related to that would be extremely helpful for me. But the interdepartmental dispatch has been a great kind of rollout for us because it works on our communication from the engine to the dispatch and to us, and it's a little bit more confined. So I think they feel a little bit more comfortable doing that than when they get a call on our non-emergency fire line from the community seeking macro support. So all in all, it's gone well, and it's getting better. But any assistance and guidance from anybody would be appreciated, just so that they feel they have everything they need.
Thanks, Elliot. Note, Iowa City has their priorities, which is to get out on the street. So we'll see Elizabeth again next month.
Can I ask Elliot again, what does macro stand for again?
Mobile Assistance Community Responders of Oakland.
Thanks.
Don't shake your head, Ann.
Told you to change that name, dude.
Keep it nice. Okay, others, now, Lieutenant King, your outreach workers are carrying police radios, is that right?
That is correct. So Amy King, Olympia Police in Washington State. We have a crisis response unit. They are on police radio, are dispatched through our dispatch center. So they're hearing everything the police are hearing and vice versa. And sometimes the community is pretty familiar with the crisis response unit at this point. So there are times where people call and are specifically requesting crew because both police and crew are hearing that information. Sometimes it's quite obvious that crew is completely appropriate, and sometimes it's maybe we decide that we probably should have a police and crew response, and then can make adjustments from there if we need to. But yeah, they are on police radio and are dispatched through dispatch.
And how's training going for that? How did that happen?
Well, you know, we started crew based on the Cahoots model out of Eugene, and they are on police radio, although they are not embedded in the police department. That would be the difference for our crew team, is that they are police department employees and work out of our station, but they do not ride with an officer. They have their own van that they use, and so in that way it's very similar to Cahoots. And so from a training standpoint, it's, you know, been really basically teaching them how to talk on the radio. And then, you know, dispatching has kind of been we didn't want to put it on the dispatchers to make decisions, as Beverly kind of alluded to, like, it's not their responsibility is to take the information and put it out. And so it's so far just been very cooperative and collaborative between officers and our crew team, deciding who needs to go. And you have to kind of take it on a call by call, case by case basis, depending upon the information that is being put out over the air. You know, crew is very aware that if they were to arrive on something and it was, you know, sometimes, as Beverly has alluded, what you're hearing as a dispatcher is not what you end up seeing when you arrive on scene. And so everything crew does is voluntary, and their safety is important. So if they were to arrive and it clearly was not something they should be at, they know to drive away, and they can get on their radio and request law enforcement assistance. And then, you know, maybe there comes a point in the future in that call when it is appropriate for them to be there, and so they can be nearby, but let the police deal with the things that need to be dealt with from a police standpoint, and then move into that resource and crisis response. So far, it's, you know, we've done a lot of building our plane as we're flying it. Things have been working well. We've been up and running for going on 4 years, but we are still learning as we go every day.
Thank you. It's the scale, you know, the intimacy of Olympia versus the magnitude of Chicago. The structures might be similar, but the interaction is completely different. Any others like to describe your dispatch system?
Yeah,
Albert?
yeah, good morning. So yeah, I could talk a little bit about the Albuquerque Community Safety Department and what we're doing. We're kind of doing things a little differently. We are getting dispatched through the fire department, but APD is actually triaging our calls. So the way the calls that go in, very similar to the way Ms. Carrington described how they receive their calls. They qualify them for the Albuquerque Community Safety Department. Then they clone that call and they send it to the fire department, and the fire department actually dispatches us out. So I know there was a question asked as far as how do we like a script for us. We don't necessarily have a script. We did have difficulty in the beginning as far as with the dispatch, knowing what calls to send us on. So what we did is we actually sent a responder who's been working with us for about 3 or 4 months. We sent them to dispatch. So they actually sat in the dispatch center and kind of worked as like a liaison, and just like somebody that they can kind of get more information about what we do and kind of bounce off ideas of, can we take this, can we not take this? And we kind of created like a triage position inside of the APD dispatch. So that's kind of how we're working with. And I mean, we're still coming up with different issues as far as with the dispatch, like I said, because we're going through APD, through AFR, and the way they title their calls is different from AFR and APD. So we're kind of we're kind of identifying some issues with our dispatch because of that situation. The naming of the calls are different between the fire department and the PD, and then we classify them differently too. So it's kind of like we're still trying to work that out as far as what that looks like. But the fire department and the police department are working with us. We meet monthly with them to kind of discuss these communication issues or dispatch issues. So, I mean, that's one thing that I can say, that we are kind of working through those issues, and the police department and fire department have been great.
Oh, thank you. That's very helpful. Could you use a technical term there, cloning the call? Could you explain what cloning the call is?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, so when the call comes into APD, they pretty much make a copy of that call and send it over to AFR. So they'll send it over to AFR. It'll pretty much come off of their board, but it'll go onto the AFR CAT. We actually have access to the CAT system for PD and the fire department. We also have a radios that program to have the information for AFR and PD on there as well.
Interesting. Do people know what call protocol software their system is using? Are people familiar with call protocol software systems? No. Okay. We may have a session in the future on call protocol software. There's some struggles going on in this area of how to add non-police community responders into the software system, and the extensive sort of questions that come with that addition requires a lot of training and additional information. So that might be a good area for future subjects. I'm going to call on someone. Brian.
Hello.
Tell us about your dispatch.
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Brian Guest. I'm with Taros Health in Arizona, and we operate a lot of mobile crisis programs throughout the state, and most of them are through our state-funded crisis system, so fairly independent of the 911 system. But we have a new program here in Flagstaff that's a co-response with one Taros Health crisis specialist and one EMT from the Flagstaff Fire Department. So we're dispatched directly through the 911 fire radio system.
And how's that going? How's that the training going for that? Are you getting the calls right? Are you getting to the right spot?
Yeah, it's been an advantage that because it's a co-response with a Flagstaff Fire EMT, they're already pretty well versed in navigating all of that. So yeah, that's been really nice, actually much smoother dispatch system than what we're used to on sort of the purely crisis system side. So that's gone well. It's been a learning curve for our people, for the mental health people who aren't used to kind of radio dispatch, but since we have the EMT with us, that's used to it, that's made it pretty smooth.
Brian, can I ask, are they responding in ambulances or just cars or vans?
Vans. Yeah, just regular non-lights and sirens vans.
Okay, so then if the EMT determines there's a medical issue, then they call an ambulance for the transport?
Exactly, yeah. And our dispatch system, of which I'm not directly a part of, so I don't have deep knowledge of it, but they've created different protocols for these sort of non-emergent calls that our unit can take. So like man down type calls, concerned citizens that see someone in public sort of acting strangely or passed out on a bench, but they're breathing. So those are the types of calls that we take. And I think it's about 15 to 20% of those, we end up escalating to a full lights and sirens once we're there, but the rest of them don't end up needing that level.
Yeah, and I'd love to piggyback on Brian. One of the things that we have found is that we are able to get on scene and coordinate a BLS transport, basic life support, no lights and sirens, pretty effectively, and that does keep the fire engines out of it and focused on fire stuff. So that kind of cost savings and time savings has been big with us. And then similar to Brian, and I think a handful of you others, while we wait for official vehicles and things, we've been able to accomplish this with marked minivans. Which is, kind of proves that there is a low hurdle to get these programs off the ground in terms of an equipment standpoint. But yeah, a handful of similarities there, Brian.
Yeah.
Ann, last question.
Yeah, Brian, I just wanted to ask you, so do you have ongoing interaction with dispatch in terms of kind of fine tuning how it's going? It would have been helpful to have more information. This call, it turned out, wasn't good for us for this reason. So that's part of the question. And the other part of the question is, I know you don't do dispatch directly, but you mentioned that they've got some specific protocols. Do you have access to them? Can you share them with us? Because that's the kind of thing that I think a lot of us are interested in, just seeing how other people and other dispatch are doing it.
Yeah, to the later question first. Yeah, I can definitely get access to those and send it out to the group or post it. However, I'm sort of newer to this group, so I don't know the best way to share that kind of stuff, but I can definitely get access to that. And to your other question, yeah, so our program directly with Flagstaff Fire is only a couple months old now. We started it on March 28th. So yeah, we have had pretty frequent ongoing conversations with dispatch, like you were saying, sort of fine tuning these things, and also fine tuning which calls are sort of ideal for this team, because we have the EMT component, but then we also have our regular mobile crisis teams that don't have the EMT, but aren't through the 911 system. And so we're sort of fine tuning things like suicidal callers. Do those need to go to this unit with the EMT, or can they go to the full mobile crisis team? So yeah, definitely continued fine tuning. Although I think we're in a pretty good place right now, just a couple months in. So we'll see what happens.
So if anyone has call scripts, send them to me and we'll post them in the membership area of the AMSA website, and so we can all share it and make use of those. I'd like to thank Beverly Carrington of Chicago 911. That was a great presentation. I learned a lot very quickly. You are a very effective, efficient communicator. Thank you. And we'll see you all here next month for another episode of AMSA Talks. Subject to be determined.
Okay, everyone, thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care.